Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to part two of our discussion and talk about One of Us, about the movie. Tonight we're going to be talking about the clip, the conversation of Luza Twersky, who had this discussion with an elderly friend of his during the car ride in. He looks up and he says, "Hey, here's my friend," and gets into this conversation with him. Now, I never met this fellow. He lives in my hometown of Muncie, but you can be sure that I will be meeting him soon. And I really would like to talk to him because I thought that he did an absolutely remarkable job not being prepared, meeting this young man. And I think there really is a lot that we could learn from him, not only for this specific narrow issue of being empathetic and a mensch, as we say, being appropriate with people who are no longer religious, but really for our interactions. It's not just for this. So I'm going to go through the conversation. If you have some time, it's up on my Facebook page, and it's actually on YouTube. If you do a search for it with my name, you'll probably find it. There are other topics that we need to talk about that were addressed in the film. Among them, custody battles. That's going to be a hard evening because that's a tough subject. This is a little more lighthearted and very important, but certainly not like that. But these are conversations that we should have. There was a discussion between Ari and one of the rabbis about the God thing. And I think that's another discussion that we should have about communicating about religion, dealing with questions that you might not have an answer to. But for tonight, let's just break down this conversation. So again, I encourage you to go have a look at it. Clip is only a minute and a half. And the conversation goes as follows. So this friend comes over and he says, "Did you come back to see your hometown?" And Luza said, "Yes, I live in LA." So the friend says, this fellow says, "Do you have a life?" Luza answers, "Surprisingly, I do." Luza says again, "I'm a different person," meaning I was a different person than I was then. Obviously, he was more rebellious or whatever. He was telling him, "I settled down and I have a life, I have a job." And the friend just looks at him. And then Luza says, let's put it this way, "I mellowed." And you see the friend smiling like, "Yeah, whatever." He wasn't really convinced. And then Luza said, he used a word that I deleted, saying not such a nice person. I'm not such a bad guy. And then perhaps the best line of the exchange is this fellow says, "I don't know about that." They both have a good laugh. And Luza says, I have a good point. Here's the most important part. He stops at this point and he tells him, he says, "Do you care if I'm happy or not?" It went totally away from what you would call just schmoozing to a real serious question on Luza's part. He says, "Do you care if I'm happy or not?" And this friend, who has a great smile and was bantering, obviously, with him, which they clearly had done this before, the friend gets deadly serious, looks at him and says, "Yes," meaning I do care if you're happy or not. And he says, I told you back then, again, when things were not as settled with him, "I told you back then that I care if you're happy. I care about you, about your person, not only or more so than what's going on with you religiously. I do care if you're happy. That's important to me." And then he says, that's why, he says in Yiddish, "That's why I got along with you and Chaim Meyer, another person in Muncie I want to meet." The fellow then says, "I won't judge you on what you do with your life. Whatever path you choose," he said in Yiddish, "whatever path you choose," a mixture of Yiddish and Hebrew, "whatever derech you take," he said, points to heaven. He says, let God deal with that. And it's interesting among this entire time, Loser looks most reflective. He gave him the space, the friendship, to be able to think about it. And then they just start, excuse me, we say in Yiddish, kibitzing around, that they would just, Loser breaks out into a big smile, and this fella seemed to say, I got to get back to work. Let's break down the conversation, and let's talk, let's have an important talk about all of this. I did have the pleasure of speaking with Loser about an hour ago. We set some time. I asked him how his interaction with this person was while they were together. I got some really interesting answers, and I asked him just a response overall. Excuse me. How's the response been to the film, and what are people saying, and how are you finding your newfound, how's it going? And I will, of course, share what he said, and it was very valuable. And of course, I wished him well. So, there are a number of things to think about here. One of which, God forbid, I'm certainly not comparing this to a condolence call, but, if you look in the news now, there's a lot of talk about what conversation happened with the bereaved widow of an army person and the president. And I'm not going there right now. You can look at my Facebook page for the rest of it, but I'm not going there right now about the conversation, but it is a very difficult conversation. Obviously nothing like this, but it is important to understand that when we meet people, and it's not the regular, hi, how you doing, there is protocol. There are things that we could learn about what to say and what not to say. Some things that we think are witty and cute might not go over that well. Our sages, our chachamim, designed the laws of Shiva with this in mind. They gave us great advice. Don't talk unless you're spoken to. The mourner decides if he or she wants to talk. And if they just want to sit quietly, that's fine. It's their choice. Remember, it's not about you. You're going to comfort them. So what I'm suggesting is, you meet someone who's in the community and his or her appearance changed. They're going through some things in life. Look how the conversation went and how wise he was. He starts off by saying, are you here? Did you come back to Muncie to see your own town? He didn't say, what are you doing here? Which might be interpreted as, what are you giving me the third degree for? And he worked his way through the conversation in a way that was nurturing and helpful. I think another thing is really important. I didn't touch upon it yesterday, but all people who abandon religion are not the same, obviously. Yesterday we talked about a specific thing about Shabbos meals, and about how many people, I believe the words I used were many or most, people who abandon religion still love the camaraderie and would enjoy having a Shabbos meal if they're allowed to participate the way they want to. But they're not all the same. Some people don't want to. Some people really don't want to be much with the community at all. And again, it's their right. Nobody has the right to tell them what they should or shouldn't be doing. One of the things I went for bereavement training, and one of my reactions to this whole brouhaha with the president and this grieving widow of that brave soldier there who was killed in Algiers. One of the things, my reaction was, I wonder if he went for bereavement counseling, because I, as the principal of a school, unfortunately, we had 3 mothers who passed away during the years that I was an active principal in the yeshiva that I founded. And 3 mothers passed away of cancer over the 18 years. And I had to speak to the students, and I always believed in going and talking to the kids and not just, letting them leave their questions. So I went for real training. And one of the things that we were taught is to explain to the children that kids grieve differently. And one of the ways I explained it to the children, especially the classmates of this boy. They have a 12-year-old boy. He finished the Shiva week. He's coming back to school now, and the kids wonder, what should I say? What shouldn't I say? one of the things that I told them that I think was helpful was I said, look, think about you play Little League, Pirche League, you're in a game, you're playing sports in a summer camp or in a league, you win a game. People respond differently to a victory. Some people, just go wild. Some people jump around, high-five each other and go, and some people just pack up the equipment and go home. Great, we won. So they're not all, people don't celebrate the same, people don't mourn the same, people don't want the same level of social interaction. So I think it's important to keep this in mind when you talk to them. Do you have a life? That was the fellow asked him, do you have a life? That was such a wise thing to say. He inquired about him again. Do you have a life? And he said, surprisingly so. And then he smiled and said, I don't know about that. Rabbi Yakov Kamenetsky, Zatzal, said a very interesting thought that was meaningful to me about Yaakov Avinu. The Torah relates, in Chumash Bereshis, the Torah relates how Yaakov came to this well, and there were shepherds around the well. There was this heavy stone, and everybody had to lift it off. And Yaakov tells them, Achai, my brothers, mi'ayin atem, where are you from? So Rabbi Yakov Kamenetsky says, why did he start his brother? They weren't his brothers. So Rabbi Yaakov says that Rabbi Yakov Kamenetsky said that Yaakov Avinu was known for his midah of truth, of emes, and honesty, integrity. These folks were hanging around in the middle of the day. Shepherds used to go out and take the sheep out to the fields and then come back at night. If they were hanging around the well, they weren't doing their job. And Yaakov wanted to rebuke them for that. In fact, he said, Hein oid hayom gadol, the day is still long. Yaakov Kamenetsky explains that since he wanted to tell them something for their lack of integrity as far as their work is concerned, he wanted to start off with a word of friendship. And he started, Achai me'ayin atem, where are you from? And that was the way of his getting into a discussion. And it's interesting that when he told him, like when the fellow tells a loser, I don't know about that, he laughed. He had this relationship with him that he built up over time. One of the kids I worked with over the years that was really struggling with religion and struggling with life really expressed this beautifully. He said, everybody's always worried about how God's doing. This is the exact quote. He had a very hard life and he went through some trauma and he was acting out. And he says, everybody's worried about how God's feeling. God's God. He can handle this. So he tells me, God's God. God can handle it. I'm a kid. People should ask me how I'm doing. And that person got to that level of interaction. I won't judge you on your life. I always, he said that, and it was very clear that this fellow was non-judgmental. And, you can't fake this. And you can't, it really does come out. And one of the things that I've learned over time, yesterday I mentioned about spending Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur with recovering addicts. They're so supportive of each other because they're going through hard times. And there's a real connection that you can't fake. I often relate the story how a few years ago on Rosh Hashanah, I got very emotional during the davening, and I put my head down and was crying. Within a few minutes, 3 kids came over to me. 2 of them, like 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds. I say kids, they patted me on the back and they said, hey, Rabbi, like as if to give me support, which was pretty funny. And then one of them came over and he said, hey, Rabbi, I'm here for the rest of the Yontif. You want to talk? I'm here for you. And he was very sincere, and it came across that way. And I think that's really the message that is very important, to convey empathy, to understand that the people coming in or coming back to the community, you meet them at a wedding, you meet them at a public event, they're uncomfortable, many of them maybe or would be. It's really important. No wisecracks, Nothing's just, I'm happy. It's nice to see you. It's really nice to see you. That's all you need to do. It's not complicated. I asked Luza when we spoke, I asked him, how was your relationship with this person? And Luza shared with me, he said, we worked together, one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. He said, we always got along fine, we were both living our lives. What was interesting is that Luza said he was always honest with me. He never sugarcoated my flaws. I asked Luza permission, can I quote him? He said, of course, yes. That this fellow didn't sugarcoat, like when they had discussions and they would talk about whatever this fellow thought Luza would need to hear, would be helpful to him. He said he never judged me. He always walked the line between validating my need to live my own life and to chart my own path in life, even though that was not along with the norms of the community. He validated and understood my need that I'm an individual. Obviously, obviously he was an out-of-the-box person and was doing his own thing. He never judged me. And he said, he remarked about my good qualities, which another thing was very interesting that Luza said, that he and this person argued a lot about God. They had many discussions about religious matters. Is there a God or isn't there a God? But he said he was always able to separate the two, be respectful. They argued about what they argued about. He respected him as a human being. And look, all of this is simple. It's simple and it's complicated. I think it's important that, as I said yesterday, I think this film really should generate honest discussions in our community about what our relationship should be, what it is that we should be doing to support and help people who are making a choice to leave the community, but to leave religion and sometimes leave the community. And I think this is very healthy. It's a healthy discussion. We weren't taught this in school. This isn't what many of us are accustomed to doing. And it's important to hear things from their perspective. Very often we see, especially guys, you see this 18, 20-year-old guy, 16-year-old guy, they're dressed a certain way, they exude certain energy, and we may find it offensive, or we may find it, don't take it personally, it's not about you. I tell this to parents. It's not about you. It's not something that they're not doing it because of you. It's not easy for them to leave their family and their community. But just to be supportive. I asked Luzer what his message to everybody would be, and he said he's very, very happy that people are talking about this, that he's been contacted by many people, including he was invited to a forum with some Hasidic people who are still in the community, proud members of the community, to discuss this. He was very happy that it's generating this level of conversation. And I'll tell you another point to this all is that don't always assume that the person leaving is bitter and angry at the community. Some certainly are, some for good reason. I had a very fascinating experience. I was out on the West Coast. This goes back a number of years ago. I was in Los Angeles for Shabbos, and I was helping one of the outspoken leaders of the community of people who abandon religion. And we were communicating all week long. He sent me an email from New York. It was dark. It was already Shabbos in New York. He wasn't observing Shabbos at the time, so he sent this email, figuring that I would answer back Motzai Shabbos after Shabbos was over. And I popped out. I responded by email, not thinking that it was it was whatever 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It was Shabbos in New York. So immediately, this guy sends me an email back, and he says, "You, period, bunch of spaces, to TOO, like, are you also abandoning religion?" He thought that I wasn't keeping Shabbos, that I was in New York, which I thought was pretty funny. So I sent him back an email. I said, what would you want it to be? You know, would you want me to join your group, or would you be... So he called me, and he actually said he would have been very disappointed if I abandoned religion. And you know, it's every situation is different, and you know, to some degree, it's really no different than any of us feel when we come to a new setting or a different setting. You know, one thing that Loser mentioned that I didn't, and I actually it may have been an idea to put them up next to each other. In the film, that Ari, one of the three people, went to a Hachnasa Sefer Torah, went to a social event, and somebody was really nasty to him there. And that's what Loser said. He said, tell the people that this guy was amazing. I had a great relationship with him, but not everybody does that, and know that it's very harmful. So again, thank you for listening. I think it's an important conversation. It's a conversation we should have between our friends, with our children. Again, it's called a teachable moment in educational terms. A teachable moment is when something comes up that's in the news and around. It's a wonderful opportunity to have discussions about it. So let's continue the dialogue. I'm going to post other segments of the film, and I definitely do want to talk about some of the hard issues. Perhaps the biggest one, the most challenging one, is dealing with these custody cases, what to do. And it's very, very complicated, obviously, when one spouse abandons religion. What do we do with visitation and custody, moving the children back and forth between these two different worlds? It's really complicated. It's something that I really believe that we ought to talk about. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening.